Whew. I swear, one of these days, I'm just gonna float away. That or your footsteps will bring you to a pond instead of my cozy abode. Either way, come in, warm up by the fire, dry yourself, and be welcome for more cozy horror with me, Dr. Plague. Let's get the story started today and get you nice and warm and get you something good to drink. This first story is a bit of a double feature because we're going to do part 1 and part 2. It's from a writer that's become quite prominent on the channel lately, and many of you will recognize the name Nicholas Leonard. Today, we're going to hear a story about a very particular priest, Father Calabas, and his involvement with a giant ape known as the Gigantopithecus. Father Calabasas stopped at Dunkin' Donuts before going to St. Mary's Church of Lynn that morning. He was a Catholic priest, but he had a sweet tooth, or, as he said to the barista that morning, "Oh, pardon my sweet fang, but I might have an extra squirt of that caramel syrup in my coffee this morning." Sweet fang was a slip that the baristas didn't care about because it was Lynn, Massachusetts, 5-something in the morning, and English was not their first language. Nobody knew if Father Calabasas was a Nordic kind of pale, Swiss, or a Swedish kind of pale, but he seemed to hail from some country where paleness is a quality of the majority populace. Nobody knew if his accent was German or Transylvanian, but it was something similar. Some accents sound all the same to Americans, but the Dunkin' coffee on his breath was proof of his becoming a part of Lynn. He carried his cold brew down the aisle of St. Mary's. It was so gray outside the church that he felt he had woken up before God did. Tap, tap, tap went his shoes, working their echolocation to the altar, where he bowed and veered left to enter his office. He lit a candle at his desk. He liked candles more than using the electric lights. He sipped his coffee while reading from a book on theology and waiting for the sun to rise. His office was something akin to a captain's quarters to him. It was decked out with shelves of books on theology and world history and decorated with religious relics, certificates, and photos of him and his fellow priests. There was a picture of him and his grandmother back home who had lived to be 107. There was a picture of him and a drug addict, a 20-something-year-old girl who he had helped on a spiritual journey of sorts. He made phone calls to her every couple of weeks and checked in, and she was doing well. There was a photo of him at a baptism for quadruplets. He looked delighted in all of these photographs, but his pale and gaunt draconian features betrayed him. Physically speaking, he was a paradox because he simply looked too ghoulish to be a priest. He sat down at his desk because he wanted to get some reading done before the 7:30 Mass. A thud made him turn his eyes away from the text and towards the ceiling. "Hark the herald pigeons sing," he said to himself. He blessed what he thought were pigeons with a chuckle. He delighted everything that lived, and he liked finding different aspects about different creatures to delight in. He appreciated how some pigeons cooed despite how humanity discarded them. He always decided to give them greeting glances when he happened upon them in the parking lot outside of St. Mary's. He liked the pigeons cooing, and, in turn, he liked the seagulls' perseverance. When he found a spider descending from the ceiling of his office one afternoon, he cupped it in his hands and carried it outside. "Don't let the pigeons make a meal of you, little friend," he told the spider, then let it down into the turf of the grass along the sidewalk. And how did he treat the ultimate creature? The one that cooed like pigeons when it prayed. The one that found a reason to preserve. The one whose heart sometimes seemed to be dangling above the precipice of hell by one cobwebby string. He treated his fellow man kindly, whether he saw him in church or not. A louder thud came. "Huh," Father Calabasas said, looking up from his text again. "That's one big person." He looked back down at his desk with his eyes, treating his Dunkin' cold brew the same way they had treated a mystery potion. There came another thud that made the priest raise his eyebrows. Then there came a great creaking from above that made the rest of the church shiver. Father Calabasas stood up. He looked up at the ceiling, and his voice was quite the injury in his eyes. But the boards of the ceiling seemed sworn to a new secrecy, or had they been so frightened that they had lost their tongue? He maneuvered around his desk while keeping his eyes up on the ceiling the whole time. He wandered out of his office and out into the main body of the church. It was still empty, but less gray, for precursory sunlight was touching the stained glass windows and just shyly lighting the church's interior. He shuffled down the aisle with his head back and his eyes up. The roof sounded like the groaning hull of a ship. It was so great that Father Calabasas quickened his pace to the exit of the church because he thought the roof might collapse in on him. He was letting out a "what?" when the sound of a giant bell creaked open this morning. It seemed that the bell's signal echoed within the shell of the atmosphere. Father Calabasas hurried out and down the marble steps at the front of the church, while the bell's signal droned lower and lower until its sound finally ceased. He appeared utterly baffled. He shimmied into the empty parking lot while the employers of the bank across the street filed out to find the source of the ringing. Again, a bell boomed out in the morning, but the thing was that St. Mary's bells were retired. They hadn't been rung for decades, not since the 70s at least. As far as anyone knew, only seagulls frequented the bell tower at the top of St. Mary's, nesting and leaving white droppings, but never ringing the giant bells. It rang again before the second sound could settle down. Father Calabasas could just make out the startled chatter of the bank employees across the street, until their voices drowned inside the metallic roaring of the bell. He spun around in the parking lot and looked up. He gasped. There on the gable, at the bell tower, was the silhouette of somebody, tall, muscular, hairy, a hominid of some sort. Its arms were lanky and long enough to reach into the bell tower. Because of the sun's triumphant rising, however, whatever stood on St. Mary's roof was only visible as a silhouette. Father Calabasas' gasp mimicked the bell and continued on until it echoed out of existence. The silhouette was black as ink in front of the creamy orange-yellow morning light. Why, the thing was blocking out the sun itself. The bank employees started screaming across the street as the thing on St. Mary's roof rang the bell again with a janky but mechanical jerk of its arms. The screaming of the crowd across the street below must have agitated the black mass atop St. Mary's roof, for it started ringing the bell in greater succession. It jerked its arms back and forth more quickly, and now the great bell set all the little bells within the bell tower to panic. Father Calabasas would have sworn he heard the thing hooting underneath the agitation of the bells, but before he could zero in his ear on the barely audible hooting, the sounds of sirens scared the thing away. It left while the bells radiated their metallic echo into Lynn. He kept his face in a gasping expression while watching the thing slide down the roof and disappear behind the church. He noticed how tawny the thing was with hair, like bristles on a ruined paintbrush. It was covered in hair. This was the last thing he noticed about it, though. Father Calabasas took a step deeper into the parking lot. Oh, how the black mass had disturbed his pigeons. He needed to go and chase it until he remembered the crowd of people across the street. He turned around before he could continue deeper into the parking lot, and he saw how the people huddled together. Even the bank security guard had an unsettled expression on his face, while the women clung to him. The bells had ceased to echo when Father Calabasas crossed the street. He put his hands out and levered his arms down in a calming motion, like a conductor quieting the band. "It's all right, everybody. The thing has ended. The thing has ended." "What was that thing, Father?" asked the security guard in a thick Bostonian accent. How strange it was to hear a Bostonian conveying fear. "Well, it was quite big," Father Calabasas said, sounding sarcastic. "I think we can all come to an agreement on that." "Oh, somebody has to catch it," the old bank receptionist squealed. "Christ, Father, what the hell was it doing up there ringing the bell?" the security guard asked. His face was red and seemed about to pop with sweat. A police car pulled up and parked on the curb of the sidewalk outside St. Mary's. The cop hopped out of the car and stood beside Father Calabasas, making the two of them immediate partners. "It was a man!" the old bank receptionist shrieked at the police officer. But before the officer could inquire further, the security guard blurted out, "I wasn't no man! Hell no! I saw that thing, officer." "Thing?" the officer inquired. "Bastard must have been 10 freaking feet tall," the security man complained. "I saw it, officer." All the employees cowered. They took turns looking up at the bell tower in front of the yellow morning sky before looking back into the huddled horde they had formed. What a sour hollandaise sauce was that sky. The police officer turned his attention to the calmest member of the bunch. Father Calabasas widened his eyes when he saw a call for responsibility in the officer's eyes. The priest cocked and tilted his head as if his skull was a bingo machine, rotating to the winning number. "I guess you saw it too, Father?" the policeman asked. "Just a shadowy version of the thing, Your Honor," Father Calabasas said, matter-of-factly. "And it was quite hairy. Oh, and tall, like he said." "These crackheads are evolving," the police officer said, while shaking his own head. "Oh, no, sir," Father Calabasas said, hunching towards the police officer and speaking in a low voice. "See, I've assisted in the rehabilitation of a few of 'em crackheads in my day, and you see, well, I don't think any of them got so hairy and tall because of their habitual bane." "Well, then, how do you explain this, Father?" the police officer asked in a low voice. "Oh, my God," the old bank receptionist shrieked. "It was a giant monkey." "Was it, Father?" the police officer inquired. "It was monkey-like, Your Honor," Father Calabasas said, after a moment's hesitation, but he didn't sound quite sure. "You guys might want to keep an eye on the police logs tomorrow," the officer chuckled. "I'm gonna take down everybody's statement. I'm sure I'll be able to find you inside. Eh, Father?" "Yes, I'll have a rendezvous with a bygone cold brew in there," the priest prophesied. The conversation that the priest and the police officer had was inconclusive. They conversed in his office, and the inquiry only seemed to cement the situation into a more bizarre molding. But the police officer believed the priest the most amongst all the other witnesses. Father Calabasas went into detail how he had heard the thud and heard the ceiling cracking before he hurried out to see the thing ringing St. Mary's bells. He left out the detail of the thing hooting, because he still wasn't completely sure of it. "By the way, Father," the police officer said, shaking the priest's hand, "you called the judge Your Honor, although I don't think you'll ever be seeing one." "What do I call you?" "Tommy, sergeant, officer, your fellow man," the police officer said with a twinkle in his eye. "I'll get out of your hair. As I understand, you've got Mass soon. I'd rather you in my hair than a giant monkey thing, Father Calabasas joked. The two chuckled, and the police officer left, leaving the priest alone in his office with an empty Dunkin' Donuts cup on his desk. Coincidentally, the bells began to ring when he hung up the phone. How politely did the priest treat the nuisance? He didn't even bother to go outside and try to see the thing, for it was the same time as was the other day when the same thing had happened. He knew what it was, but he didn't know why it was so attracted to the St. Mary's Church, to his church. The rest of the day carried on as normal, but an escalation occurred the following Monday morning when Father Calabasas was waiting for the barista to make his cold brew. There was a television in the corner of the room playing the news. Authorities are still investigating the bizarre incident, but still no one can explain what creature was on the security footage of the grocery store. The news anchor said while the footage cut to the footage of a grocery store aisle. It showed shoppers hurrying away from a hominid with orange hair, twice the size of the fleeting shoppers, as it ransacked the shelves of food. Because the footage was from above, only the head and shoulders of the creature were visible, and its visage was covered in orange hair, but its fingers were somewhere between purple and black. They were very long, thick fingers. 3 Stop and Shop employees have quit following the incident, and Stop and Shop has made an official comment about the situation, saying, "We here at Stop and Shop appreciate our customers of all different shapes and sizes, but do not condone this kind of behavior. We apologize for the disruption at our Lynn location on Washington Street the other day," the news anchor reported. This coming mere hours after another bizarre incident at St. Mary's, where the thing was reportedly sighted ringing the church bells before fleeing. "Get yourself on the nearest Mayflower and come up here," Father Calabasas said into the landline phone in his office that morning. Dr. Milton Kellogg arrived the following Wednesday afternoon, carrying his bags and suitcases into St. Mary's, which then smelled like the cardboard-tasting communion wafers and candles. Father Calabasas was in his Mass attire, a white robe with a green stripe down the center, when the doctor hurried up the aisle. "I came as soon as I could," Milton croaked. He had a nasally voice that so desperately wanted to be British. "But I didn't come all this way for you to try to convert me," he said, when coming to a stop before the altar. Father Calabasas's face became lit with amusement. He seemed to be waiting for the opportune moment to laugh. "Old friend Milton, how are the alligators?" "Business is booming," Milton said, despite the disinterest in his voice. "The Dianne skull is a real draw for the little children. Just as long as you keep them away from the real hungry living alligators," Father Calabasas teased. "Oh, have you seen the movie Lake Placid?" "Yes, I did, Tobias, and in my opinion, it's ridiculous." "I hope we have time to go and see a less ridiculous movie when this whole thing is over," Father Calabasas mused. He still seemed very amused. Milton squinted behind his glasses. His acquaintance's amusement always perplexed him. "This whole thing, your request was quite urgent, Tobias. I wish you had done some explaining over the phone. Perhaps I thought you wouldn't have come. You must instill some better belief in me, Tobias," Milton sighed. Even his sigh was disinterested. "Well, why don't we start with what you saw?" Father Calabasas went on to describe the events of the bell ringing. Milton opened up his laptop, and Father Calabasas directed him to the footage of the thing in the grocery store. "I don't believe it," Milton said, in a kind of elongated gasp. "Well, you better believe it, my friend." "No, I don't believe it," Milton said, while stroking a non-existent beard. "It seems to be a Gigantopithecus blackie." "Uh-huh, and what is that?" "An ancient species of primate that went extinct in Asia 200 years ago, give or take," Milton said. He lifted a pointed finger and started tracing his equations in the air in front of the laptop screen. "The aspects are unmistakable. Its size and orange hair, it's a distant relative of the orangutan, but it's supposed to be an ancient relative, not living, you see. I've seen it ringing my church bells. What did you call it again? Giantopithecus, Milton answered breathlessly. It was supposed to have died around the time that humans were leaving Africa. The both of them went silent, remembering their previous conversation and friendly debates. The silence was agreeable because both subconsciously knew that today was probably not the appropriate day for a friendly debate. Besides, either one already knew that they couldn't sway the other with their opinions. Finally, Father Calabasas broke the silence. Some things come back from the dead, Milton. Another silence came while they rewatched the footage of the grocery store. Are there any zoos around? Milton asked. The Stone Zoo, but this is far away and they do not have any orangutans or anything of the sort. Could it be a new species? No, it's Giantopithecus all right, Milton mused. What makes you so sure? Because you called me for help, Tobias. The utterance of his first name made Father Calabasas flinch, but he remained composed. But can you riddle me this, Dr. Kellogg? Father Calabasas waved his fingers while beginning to pace in the area between the pews and the altar. So, what if it is a Giantopithecus? Well, that's a mystery in of itself, but why did the creature, not once, but twice, ring the bells of my church? The bells of which no one in Lynn are old enough to remember ever hearing. Well, I'd say monkey see, monkey do, but you say those bells haven't been rung in years. Decades, Father Calabasas hissed. Pongo pygmatheus, that's orangutan to you, have been recorded quite comically, driving golf carts, using saws, and doing very human things, Milton explained, although there was an air of uncertainty in his voice. Oh, Milton, if you saw how urgently this thing rang the bells, Father Calabasas explained. What are you suggesting, Tobias? That this thing, this Giantopithecus, was doing more than monkey see, monkey do, Father Calabasas explained. I theorized that this was an act of desperate spiritualism, a monkey in search of God. Milton was so enamored by the priest's monologue that he was fearful of the church organ coming to life in a melodramatic song, but it didn't, so he listened and hoped that no church music would begin playing. Father Calabasas went on. You're of the party that believes humanity springs from the apes, right? Yes, Milton said, a little amused, but Giantopithecus is not an ancestor of mankind. He is man-like, Father Calabasas shrugged. He made shrugging appear so much like a move in a musical. When in your books did ancient man develop religion, or did we search for it? Is this Giantopithecus ringing the forgotten bell to, shall we say, see if God responds to him? Shall we say, to summon God? Does it want to learn? Tobias, you are thinking fantastically. Why, of all things, Milton, would the Giantopithecus come to my church and ring the bell? Father Calabasas emphasized, and although Milton was a staunch atheist, it made him go silent. I'm going to ask you a question that I fear to ask, but I must ask. Is the Giantopithecus dangerous? A 10-foot-tall primate, Milton sighed. Generally, orangutans are not aggressive towards humans, but those are orangutans. Little is known about Giantopithecus. Put one in the modern-day civilization with cars and traffic and pedestrians out for walks, children playing on playgrounds, children playing outside during recess. We might not desire experimenting with waiting just to see how Giantopithecus behaves with modern man. Father Calabasas thought of screaming bank employees. He thought of how the shoppers in the grocery store fled. I mean, Giantopithecus has the teeth of the gentlest herbivore, but again, primates have been known to become territorial. Is my church in danger? If this thing returns and causes a panic during Mass, there's no telling how it would react to human panic, Milton answered. The two became silent again. It would have been a good time for the church organ to come to life and provide some kind of daunting melody, for they didn't want to fill the silence with more theories, or worse, fill it with predictions. What do we do, Milton? We find it. We learn about it. And what do we do if it comes back at the wrong time? Father Calabasas said, rephrasing his question and making it sound dire. How do I protect my flock? Do you mean firepower, Tobias? You know guns aren't allowed in church. Milton teased. He didn't smile, though. How long do you plan on staying in Massachusetts, Doctor? Father Calabasas asked, after deliberating in himself and his mind. Now, Milton began, I plan on staying a lot longer than I initially planned.
Ooh, such a powerful story. And I suppose you'll be expecting part 2. Here, take something warm to drink. It's fresh tea, straight from the fire. I hope you like it with honey and mint, as I do, because you'll want to be warm and well hydrated for part 2 of Father Calabasas' story.
Father Calabasas passed the background check, and on Saturday night he wasn't getting ready for Mass in the morning, but he was sawing off the barrel of his newly purchased double-barrel shotgun. There was a bandolier of shells hung up on the wall, while statuettes of Mary held their arms out wide, as if shrugging in surprise. While sawing off the barrel of his new shotgun, he thought of that comment Milton made about an orangutan using a saw. The sound of the saw teeth biting into the barrel filled his office while he worked by candlelight. The barrel toppled onto the floor and let out a hollow clang that was similar to the bells. Father Calabasas held up the sawed-off shotgun and examined it, examining how the orange candlelight reflected on its black barrel. I dub thee Little Flock, he told the shotgun. He then turned around to the lever-action rifle and considered sawing off the buttstock and barrel as well, but was unsure. It was a Marlin Model 336, and he had already decided to name it David, after the David and Goliath story. Had anybody ever pitied the giant? This he contemplated while babysitting his new purchases in his office. He remembered how urgently the black silhouette rang the bells. It gave him a sense of dread, but also a sense of pity. It was a sense of sympathy. Was it a sense of sympathy? This thing, it reminded him of the abominable snowman from the 1964 Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer film. He used to watch it every Christmas when he was a boy in his snowy village, and the abominable snowman always frightened him greatly. Father Calabasas trekked into Lynn Woods the following Sunday afternoon. Milton wore a Davy Crockett hat with a raccoon tail attached to it. He also wore a beige safari uniform with the pants tucked down into his combat boots. Father Calabasas wore his black cassock. He looked as ghoulish as always, but he looked alert. "Ah!" Milton yelped when Father Calabasas drew Little Flock from within his cassock. Luckily, he did this while they were deep enough within the Lynn Woods. "Do you have any idea how illegal that is?" Milton asked, but Father Calabasas didn't care. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," Father Calabasas quoted, but this did not assuage Milton at all. "Did you not bring a gun, my friend?" "A gun?" Milton squealed. "Yes. Don't you use one of those revolvers when tiptoeing around your alligators?" "Yes, but that is in South Carolina. I have a revolver, not a sawed-off shotgun. We aren't Bonnie and Clyde, Tobias." "I believe he used a sawed-off rifle." But his sweetheart used a sawed-off 20-gauge. That's not the point, Milton squeaked. We have a Gigantopithecus to catch, Milton. This is for protection, Father Calabasas said. Milton looked to his side to see the priest cradling the shotgun in his arms, the way someone might carry a little lapdog against his chest. There's an old legend about pirates who buried treasure in these woods, Doctor, Father Calabasas mused, amongst the crunching of his footsteps. They say he died in an earthquake. Thus, the term Dungeon Rock is now a sort of tourist attraction in the woods. Dungeon Rock. It's a stony crevice in the earth underneath a wedge of boulder, Father Calabasas went on. I know about this only because a youngster I befriended used to crawl into the crevice to shoot up. It's dark and damp. A real den down there it is. Have you been down there before? I did. I went with the youngster one night to go and collect her discarded needles when she finally decided to turn over a new leaf. I tell you this in confidence, of course, but I am proud of her, and this forest brings up memories. She studies at the North Shore Community College now. Oh, but I haven't seen her in a while. Milton simply listened to the priest while they walked. In fact, the more they walked, the more they remembered their friendship, and the less they remembered the Gigantopithecus. They laughed about the first debate they had had at Cambridge. Their friendship was built off of disagreement, but also a kind of respect for each other. They both knew that the other possessed a propensity for learning. It was what they talked about while Milton put vinegar on his fish and chips, and Father Calabasas dipped his fries in tartar sauce. Oh, I love tartar sauce, Father Calabasas moaned, as the two scaled the hill in the woods that led to Dungeon Rock. Milton threw his hands up as the two stopped. The gesture made Father Calabasas regret his wild profession of love for tartar sauce, but the forest didn't move. No crows flew away, but they remained in the branches where the sun had beaten through in lime-colored flakes. Do you see this, Tobias? Milton whispered, while reaching into a tuft of long orange hair. He grabbed the tuft as gently as he could and pulled it out of the tree bark like wool. The hair of a Gigantopithecus, Father Calabasas gasped. Milton put the tuft of hair up to his nose and sniffed. The sample is fresh, he said, snapishly. Look around for prints or more tufts of hair. Father Calabasas started doing so, but the earth was too dry for prints, and they were in the hills near Dungeon Rock, so there was too much gravel within the dirt. He unfolded his arms and drew his shotgun while the two crept into the opening in the forest where Dungeon Rock was. There it is, Father Calabasas said. The entrance to Dungeon Rock. I don't think the species could squeeze in there. But we can, Father Calabasas said, gripping Milton's arm when the Gigantopithecus emerged out of the trees. How yellow were its eyes, its face, a purpley bruised visage. It opened its mouth and roared, displaying yellow canine teeth and flinging spit into the air. Father Calabasas pulled Milton into the entrance of Dungeon Rock, just as the Gigantopithecus swiped at the two of them. They nearly tumbled down the wooden stairs and would have been digested by the dark stomach of Dungeon Rock, but Father Calabasas caught himself. He held on to both Milton and his shotgun. The two caught their breath while listening to the agitated breathing of the Gigantopithecus. Its breathing amplified into a hoot and then into a shriek. Very little sunlight leaked into the stairway in Dungeon Rock while the two sat listening. They mastered their footsteps on the stairs, intaking the primal odor of the Gigantopithecus while it continued to complain in discordant hoots and shrieks above the entrance to Dungeon Rock. They could smell its breath, and it smelled like swampy pond water. Its body odor was doggy, almost as pungent as a cow. They reminisced about its arms. Oh, its biceps. Had it indeed grabbed a hold of Milton, There was no telling what would have been done to the paleontologist. They must have hunkered down in the stairway for 20 minutes while waiting for the beast to amble away. Oh, and the heartbreak Father Calabasas felt while replaying the scene in his head. Although this species had perhaps tried to do something significant by ringing the bells, it simply could not be allowed to. Those were not its bells to ring. Such thoughts ran through Father Calabasas' mind while he held on to his friend and his little shotgun. "Tomorrow night, Milton," he whispered, "we must bring the JustAmy to its end." "Tobias, you must understand. We caught it off guard." "It's too dangerous," the priest hissed, in a whisper, his voice being carried down the stairwell of Dungeon Rock. "How angry it was when we entered its domain today. How angry will it be when our Lord doesn't answer to its baying at the bells? What rampage will be sent into when it's denied by God? Then it will truly become the ape that it was always meant to be." The ending notes of the priest's mini-speech echoed down the stairway, being carried down into the dark stomach of Dungeon Rock. "Then it will truly be the ape it was always meant to be. To be. Be. Milton took a deep breath through his nose. He was too frightened, even still. "It will ransack the streets of Lynn," the priest hissed. "It will overrun vehicles. It will turn its victims' skulls into bells." Milton was too abhorred to speak. The plan was simple. Milton was stationed in the bell tower, while Father Calabasas waited at the altar with his shotgun and lever action. All the candles in the church along the pillars were lit, with the altar being the most lit area of the church. He was curious, the plan also acting as an experiment, for there was a plate of communion wafers and a goblet of red wine on the altar. Would the JustAmy accept the Eucharist? Did the JustAmy perhaps, on some level, possess a misty understanding of ceremony? Father Calabasas wanted to know. The father flinched at the first tolling of the bell. He blinked and reminded himself of his mission. He looked down the long aisle between the pews, looking out the church's open door and imagining it would be big enough for the JustAmy to crawl through. He swallowed his dread and kept his eyes on the doorway as another tolling sounded. He imagined how scared his friend was, but he reminded himself again that this mad idea had a purpose. For some time, Father Calabasas listened to the bells from above. They weren't ringing the way the JustAmy had rung them. They clanged more meekly, not as urgently. The bells ceased. Silence fell upon Lynn. Father Calabasas retained his composure when the thing came in from the street, crawled up the marble steps outside and bowed its head while crawling to fit through the doorway. But it got on its two hind feet when it entered the aisle. It was no longer just a split-second episode in Linwood. It was no longer a silhouette. The JustAmy stood there, yards away from the priest. Father Calabasas inhaled as calmly as he could through his nose and tried his best not to show emotion while sharing eye contact with the JustAmy. Its yellow eyes seemed wetted by the candlelight, its woolly coat of orange hair covering its body aside from a plate of purple muscle on its front side. Its mouth and nose had a protruding nature. It looked alarmingly more like a human than an orangutan. Oh, but it was so unnaturally tall. It looked alarmed to see the priest, or was that its natural visage? Father Calabasas tried to keep his hands from shaking while he picked up and offered the plate of communion wafers in the air, which now was a battle of scents of the JustAmy and the warm scent of the candles. "The body of Christ," he murmured, in a voice he hoped only God could hear. The Giantopithecus just stared blankly at him. Was there some kind of recognition in its yellow eyes? "Is this what you want, Father Calabasas?" asked the Giantopithecus. But it didn't answer. This didn't mean yes, but it didn't mean no either. "If it is, I'll bring it to you in the woods every Sunday evening." The Giantopithecus didn't understand this either. It blinked and sniffed the air while looking at the priest dead on. It cleared its throat in a low grumble and curled back its lip in perhaps some kind of an attempt at communication. It sniffed the air further, and somehow Father Calabasas knew it was trying to smell the communion wafers. Was there a sense of familiarity being tied to the air between them? The Giantopithecus stepped forward, beginning its descent down the aisle. Father Calabasas kept the plate of communion wafers in front of him and waited. "The body of Christ," he repeated, in a voice that was clearer than earlier. He gulped. The Giantopithecus was extending out its long arm. It was actually reaching for the plate, and it made Father Calabasas' heart throb so much that he could have smiled. The Giantopithecus swatted the plate out of Father Calabasas' hand. The air was a glitter of communion wafers for a second, while the plate clanged to the floor. It roared while diving at the altar. Father Calabasas ducked just in time and grabbed his shotgun. He crawled away from the altar while the Giantopithecus turned around. The shotgun blasted out a tolling of its own. The Giantopithecus roared in anger, but the buckshot had created little violent polka dots along the side of its purple chest. It closed its eyes and continued roaring. Father Calabasas fired a second time. He could hear the flesh being ripped off its shoulder when the buckshot splashed across the air. His whole body trembled while unlocking the shotgun and letting the barrel down. The thing was charging at him. He dove into a pew before he could reload Little Flock. The shotgun shells which he held went rolling away, rolling down another pew and another. The creature's fists shot down and cracked one of the pew benches in two. Boards and splinters erupted into the air. Father Calabasas climbed over a pew, catching a glimmering brass shell on the floor. He picked it up, shoved it into the shotgun, and flipped the barrel back up. The Giantopithecus regained its footing just in time, and brought both its fists up with the vigor of an executioner's beheading axe. Father Calabasas pulled his finger down on all the triggers all the way. The Giantopithecus threw its head back immediately when its forehead caught the brunt of the buckshot. It had been so close to Father Calabasas that its head had caught every ball in the volley of the round. Its deflating roar came in conjunction with the wet crack its skull made. Father Calabasas watched the Giantopithecus make one final expression while it fell down backwards. Its mouth was open as if it wanted to let out a final hoot, a final prayer. The church echoed with the thud its falling body made. Father Calabasas panted while watching streams exit gracefully out of the wedge at the top of its forehead. The wound reminded him of the entrance to Dungeon Rock. Milton hurried into the church while Father Calabasas watched the violent liquid pooling out of the Giantopithecus' skull. "Thank God you're all right," Milton said, sounding like he was breathing for the first time. "'Tis quite the time to thank God," Father Calabasas said, while turning around to face his friend. "Did it reach for the communion wafers?" "There was a moment where I thought it was," Father Calabasas answered, matter-of-factly. He held the shotgun out limply, now that it was empty, suddenly remembered he was holding it, and was startled by it. "Oh," he laughed, "I better go hide this before the police arrive." "Yes, you better," Milton murmured. He was a bit astonished at his friend's resilience, or was it a lack of surprise? It made him start to wonder if his friend had actually performed the rites of exorcism before. Part of him really didn't want to know. Gunshots aren't the most abnormal thing in this part of the world, but they're very abnormal from inside St. Mary's, so the residents surrounded the church and notified the authorities. "Gunshots?" Father Calabasas said to the police officer, while Milton was finishing dragging the Giantopithecus's body down into the church basement. The priest was stalling the cops on the front steps outside the church. "You know, now that you mention it, a loud noise did wake me from my nap, but there might be mice in the church rafters. Don't tell anybody. By the way, do you know any good exterminators, Your Honor?" They had used ropes to pull and drag the behemoth primitive along the floor until they let it tumble down the basement steps. Milton wanted to bring it back with him to South Carolina for further study without the pesky government involving itself, but there was something that unnerved him about the Giantopithecus, even though it was dead. It picked at his mind and turned his consciousness into a scab while he stood over the woolly orange body of the thing, Father Calabasas distracting the police outside. An ape that, as Father Calabasas had stated, presented an act of desperate spiritualism. Was Milton's heart breaking, or was his mindset evolving against itself while he loomed over the body of the Giantopithecus? He certainly had never scaled any religious buildings to ring a bell. He couldn't remember any time in his life where he was enthralled in an act of desperate spiritualism, but this ancient ape was. So, Milton and Father Calabasas readied the body for the remaining hours of darkness that came after midnight. He got a rental car when the sun came up, and the two struggled transporting the cadaver into the rental car. They shook hands, and Milton drove away, besides a couple of incidences on the highway where Milton felt the car was going to lift forward into the air to balance out the 1,000 pounds of ape in the back. The commute went smoothly. He spent a couple of days transporting the body in his homemade lab near the alligator farm. He spent even more dissecting and preserving the body, but it was when he got to the head that a familiar fear entered him, and it led him to call his old friend in Lynn, Massachusetts, in an act of desperate spiritualism.
I really like that story. It's got layers, and much like Shrek, we stand layers in this house. Moving right along, let's read another well-known artist on the channel. 10 Minute Horror has written a story about working in a video store in the 90s and finding something on a videotape that might be unexpected.
I'd worked there for 2 years and loved it. There were all kinds of deals and discounts for employees, and we had a big popcorn machine like you see in the movie theaters, free for anyone who wanted a bag. We had a large repeat customer base of regulars that always looked for recommendations, which we were thrilled to give. 2 of us would close up at the end of the night, with one typically being a guy. Yet somehow on that Sunday, it ended up being 2 girls. I was pretty tired from a bad night of sleep and not feeling real great, so I was just trying to get to the end of the shift. My coworker Michelle's boyfriend came by about an hour before closing and went through the aisles repeatedly, trying to kill time. Finally, I told her she could take off and I'd close up by myself. It was a Sunday, so we'd be closing at 8, which was half an hour away, and the store had been quiet all day, so I wasn't expecting a big rush. A few minutes after they left, I decided to start cleaning up, which meant going around and collecting the garbage bags from all the bins around the store. The store itself was huge, with dozens of 5-foot-high rows of VHS tapes and a large load-bearing pillar decorated with prop characters. There were TVs playing new releases of all kinds. As I walked out from behind the desk to start with the garbage bins, I heard the familiar ding sound come from the front door. It seemed we had a late customer. I went back behind the desk and put another VHS in the automatic tape rewinder. Those things were great. As the tape rewound, I tried to get a better look at who had come in, but they'd turned down the first aisle, horror, and the shelves and one of the large pillars blocked my view. I waited for them to move out from behind the pillar, but they stayed there. Then the tape popped up in the rewinder, and I let out an embarrassing gasp. I kind of winced at myself as I replaced the tape in the plastic sleeve. I set another tape to rewind and decided to start collecting the garbage near the front. When I got up to the horror aisle, the customer was gone. The store was quiet. I walked down the aisle and turned to the right where I could see down 2 more rows. There was no one. I went down another row and walked out to the main aisle leading to the desk and came face to face with the customer. He was a man in his mid-20s, about 6 feet tall. He had long jet black hair and was dressed all in black. He had on a dirty leather jacket and wore chains with pentagrams and goat skulls. The Satanist look wasn't exactly intimidating back then, as it kind of blended in with the punk crowd in the area. I couldn't tell which side this guy was on, but there was something behind his eyes that made me feel cold. He stared at me, long and hard. It was the most uncomfortable I'd ever been. Neither of us spoke, and for a moment, I thought he was going to rush me. Then the tape rewinder popped up and killed the tension. I let out a nervous laugh, and he smiled at me like he'd known me my whole life. "Good evening," he said, and walked past me. I croaked out, "You too," as I heard the front door open and close in that familiar jingle. I turned and saw the man outside, walking off towards his car at the far end of the parking lot. It was 7:45, so I decided to shut the store down early. The man left a lasting impression, and I called my boyfriend and told him to be there at 8 to pick me up. I locked the front door and felt a lot better. I picked up all the garbage and put it away. Then I went back to the front desk to empty the till, and that's when I saw something on the counter. It was a VHS tape in a plastic container. The man must have returned it. Only, it wasn't one of ours. It had the same kind of clear plastic holder we used, but it didn't have a sleeve or a jacket from our store. The tape inside it had a sticker on it with a name written on it. It said, Melissa. That's my name. The tape wasn't rewound. It was as far to the right as it could get, like it had been watched to the very end. My hands were shaking, but I managed to put the tape in the rewinder. It was an automatic reaction. I wasn't even sure I wanted to watch the tape. As it rewound, I argued with myself over what to do. I thought about not watching it, but knew it would eat away at me if I didn't. I thought about waiting for my boyfriend and watching it with him, but he was a hothead, and if it was something bad, I could see him going postal. I decided to watch it by myself in the back office. My finger had hovered over the play button, but eventually I pressed it. The tape started with static, then an image took over. It was a grainy handheld camera, held by someone in the driver's seat of a car that was moving. The holder of the camera was trying to keep it steady while they drove. After several seconds, the available hand turned the steering wheel, and I caught a glimpse of something out of the windshield that I recognized. It was the glowing sign above our store, South Coast Videos, in neon. I watched the car pull into the back end of the parking lot, right where the man had been going earlier. The camera pointed at the front entrance of the video store, and waited. A family car entered the parking lot. My boyfriend. It pulled up in front of the store, and I watched myself kiss him as I got in. The video cut to footage from a new day and another work drop-off, this time by my parents. It showed another and another, over a dozen cuts of me getting out of the car and going into the store. Then the video showed me coming out, going into whichever car was picking me up that night and driving off. In the video, I recognized the pants I was wearing from the previous day, and realized I was watching footage from last night. I watched myself get into my parents' car and drive away. This time, the camera followed. The driver was tailing us, and it stuck with us all the way home. I watched my parents' car pull into our driveway. The camera focused on our house, number 42, and then cut to black. For a moment I thought that was it, but the tape had more. A new image flickered on. It said it was just after 3 a.m. It was from inside the car again, and it was pointing at my house. The driver's side door opened and the camera got out. It moved across the street and towards the side of the house. The camera pointed in through the window along the side as it moved towards the backyard. I saw the living room, the dining room. They were both dark and empty. At the back door, there was a fumbling and jangling before a small metal tool was brought out and jammed into the lock. It was twisted, and the door popped open. My heart went from beating 1,000,000 times per second to not at all. The man was inside my house. The camera switched to the grainy night vision and moved through the empty kitchen, and entered the living room and looked at photos hanging on the walls and books stacked on the shelves. It took the whole room in. Then it turned to the staircase that led up to the bedroom. The camera moved up the stairs quietly and reached the second floor. I pressed stop on the VCR. I wasn't sure I wanted to continue. I reconsidered getting my boyfriend and asking him to watch and tell me what had happened. But I had to know. I pressed play. The tape began with the camera looking left, then right down the hallway. I knew that to the right was my younger brother and sister's room, and to the left was the bathroom, my parents' room, and mine at the far end. The camera started left, focusing on the door at the end of the hallway. My door. The camera moved past the bathroom and my parents' room without slowing. Came to stop on my door. A hand reached out and turned the knob. It opened a crack, and a hand slipped in further, bringing the camera with it. My bedroom door closed with the man on the inside. The camera found my bed, and there I was, sound asleep. My thumb hovered over the stop button on the VCR, ready to end whatever it was about to see before it traumatized me for life. The camera was placed on my desk, facing the bed. The man from the store came into view. He carried a rag in his hand. I watched him creep up onto the bed, easing himself across it until he was over the top of me. Then he pressed the rag down over my face. My body trembled and shook and then went still. I pressed stop and threw up in the garbage bin beside the TV. Watching the attack, I'd gotten a horrible, familiar feeling, like a forgotten memory, reappearing after being lost. I took a few minutes, collecting myself, before deciding once again that whatever happened to me on that tape, I needed to know. I pressed play again, and there was the image of my unconscious body in my bed, being straddled by a black-clothed goth psychopath. The man pulled the rag away from my face. He pulled my shirt up over my head, then reached around to the back of his pants. He pulled out a knife with a ceremonial handle and dragged it down the center of my chest without drawing a drop of blood. Then he put the blade to the palm of his left hand and cut. He winced at the pain, but then resheathed the knife and dabbed his right finger and the blood of his palm. The man used the blood to draw all over my stomach and chest. He made strange markings on my skin, taking his time while he did so. Then he finished and lit a candle. He held it with his right hand and put his bloody left hand on my stomach. I could hear him on the tape, speaking quietly, but couldn't make out what he was saying. It sounded like hushed chanting or praying. As he went on, my back began to arch upward and lift off the bed. My mouth opened and I held one long, continuous gasp for what felt like minutes. Then the man stopped and so did my gasp. I fell limply back to the bed, and the candle blew out. After a moment, the man got up and cleaned the blood off my stomach, using a towel he'd brought. He grabbed the camera from the desk and crept out of my room. Everything went hazy after that. I'd sweated through all my clothes, my whole body trembling, but I still watched the camera sneak back out my house into his car. The video pulled something back in my memories, a strange, frightening disturbance in the night, only brief flashes and lengths and dismissed as a bad dream. But I had a horrible migraine when I woke up. It all made sense. I showed the video to my boyfriend and he freaked out. We called the police and gave them every bit of evidence there was. But the man was never found. That was years ago, and the only reason I'm thinking about it now is because I'm pregnant. There are strange markings appearing on my growing belly that look a lot like the ones the man drew in his own blood.
Sorry. Just taking a moment to listen to that rain. It's always something that puts me in mind of good horror and good times. Let's move on to the next one. It's a story by our good friend, Miles Triddle, about someone who hasn't quite been put to rest. Someone who enjoys visiting the living, perhaps a little too much. So let's get a story from the other side.
I died in 1941, shortly after my daddy went off to war. I was just 15 and already sick when he was drafted. I think Mama knew I wasn't going to make it, and she begged Daddy to find a way out of the draft. I don't know if he tried or not, only that he left. And then I died a few weeks later. Mama took it hard. I watched her fall apart from behind the walls of our house. It was, at one point, a nice house. Then the letter came, saying that Daddy was killed by a Nazi's bullet. Mama couldn't take that at all. My Aunt Charlotte took Mama in to live with her, which probably saved her life. Sadly, I've lost touch with Mama since then. I suppose odds are pretty high that she's dead too by now. I think all the heartbreak around Daddy and me dying trapped my soul in this old house. And since Mama never sold it, I doubt she could have borne to. No one ever moved in. If she's dead, she apparently didn't will the house to anybody. It's still abandoned by all but me. It's a little ways out of town, trees and bushes that were just saplings when I was breathing are big wild things now. They've never been pruned, not once. I can't go outside the house to have a look, but I bet it isn't even visible from the road. I'd guess the bank owns this place now, and they've just decided to let it rot. You know what, though? I'm glad. 'Cause being in an old abandoned house is the only way I get to have any fun. How? The teenagers, friend. Teenagers started sneaking in here on dares back in the early 90s, right as the paint was beginning to peel. First, they threw rocks through all the windows. I didn't appreciate that, although I could see the fun in it. I haven't aged a day since I died, so I'm still a 15-year-old spirit. Ha! The very first pair who actually snuck in here were a couple of guys, just older than me, who were dared by their giddy girlfriends. As they crept around, these guys were whispering about whether or not the house was haunted. So I slammed the door and sent them running and screaming. Over time, I gave this place a reputation as a bona fide haunted house. Round October, each year, kids come from other towns even to experience my knocking and slamming. They all thought they could handle it, but I sent every one of them scurrying off. Something changed in the early 2000s. The teens started seeming less afraid of me, more curious. I couldn't scare them off as easily, which was fine since I enjoyed having them around. But they also started trying to talk to me. They bring in tape recorders and cameras to try to capture the stuff I do. I was always careful not to make anything move on camera, though. I liked how everyone else just had to take the kids I scared at their word. Providing proof of myself would have ruined the mystique. Some of the teenagers brought weird energy into the house. It was like having somebody track mud across the clean floor. Except instead of mud, it was anger, depression, jealousy, all sorts of ugly things. One thing you learn when you're dead is emotions are very tangible. They have a charge like a magnet or a battery. The right charge gives me energy, makes the house sort of hum. Some of the teens call it the house's aura or vibe. But if you bring the wrong charge in here, something too negative, it messes everything up. I feel tired. The house feels older, and sometimes I can sense things moving outside. I don't mean outside like in the yard. I mean outside my spiritual periphery. See, ghosts like me are not the only type of spirit. There's some really dark stuff out there. Those dark spirits, well, they're attracted to negative energy. I sense them lurking, feel them sniffing out the anger and jealousy and sadness in here. Sometimes I wonder if I'm the only thing keeping them out of this space. I am, in spite of everything, a pretty positive guy. There's one object which I will never ever allow into this house again. Whenever I see one, I immediately do something really scary, like make footsteps right behind the teenagers or brush at their hair. I do whatever I can to get them out of here. The object in question is something called a Ouija board. I had never seen or heard of such a thing until the day I almost watched some poor kid lose his soul, and might have almost lost my house to an evil spirit. That, friend, after all of this existence, is a story I would like to tell you today. They came in a foursome: Gavin, Lily, Emma, and Roland. Gavin and Lily were the ghost enthusiasts. They came in with all the presuppositions one would expect from a couple of kids who think they know everything about a subject in which nothing is really known to the living. Emma didn't seem nearly as enthusiastic about the visit, even though she was the real empath in the group. That'll come in real handy for me later. You'll see. Now Roland made me uneasy. See, styles and fashion have changed so much since my time that I have difficulty reading people based on their appearance anymore. For example, 30 years ago, if someone crept in here at night wearing a pair of tattered jeans, I'd have assumed they were a junkie that needed to be chased out before they got too comfortable in my house. Nowadays, everybody's wearing jeans that look ready to fall apart. They're all the rage, as I've heard being hip called at one time or another. All this to say, I have to judge people by stuff that's intangible to the physical world, but potent to me. These things are like someone's mental balance or spiritual harmony. The closest thing I can compare these things to are smell, but you don't get them through your nose. You just kind of pick it up, much like when you drive by a hog farm and before you realize it, you're aware you're breathing in pig stink. Roland's pig stink comprised of grief, insecurity, and anger. disdain for the world and everything in it. I'm not a psychic, but I assumed right away that Roland had lost someone very close, probably recently. Roland had the spiritual posture of someone who's been personally insulted by death. The foursome crept around for a while, and I let him be. I wanted to feel him out. Between Emma's empathic abilities and whatever was going on with Roland, I guess I was sort of nervous about this bunch. Eventually they went upstairs and ended up in my room, of all places. The very room in which I died back in 41. That's when Lily pulled out the Ouija board, and I studied it while they all got comfortable. But I didn't really understand how it worked. Not until Gavin put this little triangle on the board that he called a planchette. Seeing the hole in the middle of the planchette, I understood how the letters on the board were laid out for spelling. The corners designated for yes or no. I found it a little strange that the board had a space for goodbye, but not one for hello. Anyway, I've become a master of suspense over the years, so I let the group play for a few minutes without a response. You know, what finally made me move the thing was that I wasn't sure I could. I wanted to find out. Started by just sliding it a tiny bit, not spelling anything or questioning and asking them anything. Boy, did that get my new friends excited. "Are you doing that?" Lily asked Emma, then Roland. Both shook their heads. Lily and Gavin shared a look. Then, all theatrically, she asked, "What's your name, spirit?" I could have spelled out something like Beelzebub or even Satan, but you have to build up to those sorts of things. Instead, I gave them my real name, B.O.B., Bob. I always went by Robert in life, but, well, Bob spells quicker. "Hi, Bob," Gavin said, after the group simmered down. "We've come here respectfully to try to get your story. We want to know about who you were, and if you'll tell us what the afterlife is like." "Well, Gavin, it's pretty fun, because I get to mess with people like you," I thought, as I slid the planchette straight to no. I was trying to put myself in mind of a dark spirit, and I imagined such a thing would be pretty standoffish. "Oh, okay," Lily said. "Is there anything you do want to tell us?" "Can you ask it about, Roland said. "Well, we'll get there, don't worry," Gavin put in. I made him wait a few more seconds, then I slid the planchette around to spell "not safe." Oh, spooky, right? I told you I was good at this. I'd never used an Ouija board before, but same rules applied. Take it slow, keep it vague, give them lots of time to speculate and doubt themselves. "Not safe?" Gavin asked, but more to the group than to me. Roland squirmed like he couldn't get comfortable, or like he knew something he wasn't sharing. His pig stink bloomed around him, billowing out of the top of his head like a smokestack. I didn't like it. "Guys, can I be honest?" Emma asked. "I've actually been feeling a little unsafe, like something's off here. Maybe we should listen to what the board's saying." "Oh, Emma, no, don't spoil the fun." I guess she was picking up on her friend Roland's negative energy, but she was attributing it to me, attempting to come across like someone warning the group of danger, rather than threatening the danger myself. So I moved the planchette around to spell trapped. As the group clamored about what that might mean, I decided to shake Gavin and Lily's confidence. I hovered over them both, plucked one hair from each of their heads. This took an immense amount of energy from me, but it was worth it. Both folded neatly in half on the floor. Then I dropped both their hairs onto the Ouija board. Pandemonium ensued. Gavin jumped to his feet. Lily slid back, elbows tripping. The other two stayed put, but sat up, stiff as corpses. All four were shouting and cursing and swearing. Do you want to hurt us? Emma asked, and dang it, I would have slid it to yes when they all touched the planchette again, if anyone else had asked, but I couldn't do that to poor Emma. I liked her. She seemed sweet, and the fact that she had a connection with the spirit realm, well, reminded me of how it felt to have my crush assigned as my lab partner in high school. It didn't mean anything was gonna happen between us, obviously. That would be ludicrous given my terminal case of death, but it made it feel more possible, I suppose. Like I said, I'm still 15. I slid the planchette to no. Can I ask something? That was Raelyn. Gavin gestured at him to go ahead after he sat back down. Have you been following me? Before I could answer, I felt myself pushed backwards by a soft but unmistakably powerful presence. The room's weight suddenly doubled. I'd never felt anything like this before. I'll never know what the living teens felt, but they all removed their hands from the planchette and leaned away from the board at the same moment. I stretched forward to move the planchette, realizing only later how that might have been the scariest thing I did that night. They all sat transfixed as I pushed the planchette around to spell careful. I wasn't trying to scare them, but I did worry a healthy dose of fear might be appropriate. I sensed movement from Raelyn's direction. He was looking down, staring at his own chest. Emma watched him closely. I believe she sensed what I saw. A shadow copy of Raelyn stood, rising from his body. At full height, he protruded from the boy's shoulders and neck. It stood well over 6 feet. It looked directly at me, held my gaze as it metamorphosed. Besides bearing Raelyn's general shape, it looked nothing like him. It was absolutely inhuman, with cheeks so thin and sunken I could see its jagged teeth outlined beneath the leathery skin. The eyes which held me were sunken far into the skull and as small as BBs, but they glowed brighter than anything else. The thing's smoky claws now commanded the planchette. Remember, Raelyn had asked the board if he was being followed. I was going to answer no before I was forced away by the new dark spirit. The dark spirit dragged the planchette towards yes, causing an anxious stir amongst the teenagers. It spelled safe now. The dark spirit's paper-thin lips parted slightly, and I could see pointed teeth as black as the rest of it. Okay, that's good, Lily said. It says it's been following you, but that you're safe now, so that must mean it's like protecting you. Yeah, that's definitely a good thing, Gavin agreed. No, Gavin, no, Lily, it's not a good thing, I screamed at them, but of course they couldn't hear me. Emma glanced my way, though. The planchette started moving again, guided by the smoky claw of the figure protruding from Raelyn's back. It spelled Raelyn's name. Emma gripped his arm as if to anchor him. Then the dark spirit spelled out the cruelest, most obscene lie yet. It's Mom. Again, the terrible figure sneered at me. I was now convinced that it was a demon. Emma's grip morphed into a sideways hug as she pulled poor Raelyn towards herself. He started crying. The other two exchanged nervous whispers, too quietly for even me to hear. The planchette began to move again, but I summoned every kilowatt of energy I could to reach through the pressure force field and stop it. The demon growled at me, and with a too long arm, it swiped me away. I spun backward like an astronaut through space. Emma sensed all of this. Still hugging Raelyn, she looked just above his head, exactly where the glowing demon protruded. Mom, why did you do it? Raelyn asked, voice choked by heartbreak. How could you just leave us like that? This was real bad. I apologize for delaying what happened next, but you need to understand some things about death. See, there are different kinds of death. Mine was natural, but premature by natural standards. That sort of discrepancy, when combined with my mother's intense grief, created the environment which trapped me here. The death by human hands, be it murder or suicide, tears a hole through the separation between the living and the dead, like a bullet punched through paper. The holes take a long time to heal, if it ever does, and while it's open, just about anything can pass through. All this to say, the demon which had infested Roland had probably crawled through the hole left by his mother and attached itself to him. I bet it offered comfort at first, but judging by Roland's demeanor, even before the Ouija board session, it had already started getting mean. Classic demon trickery. If it could convince Roland to welcome it by pretending to be his mother's ghost, there's no telling how far it could take the possession. It might even kill Roland and harvest his soul. So when we left off, Roland, believing he was talking to his mother, had just asked how she could leave him. The demon began to answer, but I focused on getting the teens to safety. If I couldn't save Roland, then I wanted to at least try to protect the others. I'll admit, in the back of my mind, I was wondering what would happen if that demon fully manifested in my house. It had already demonstrated immense power over me, and that frightened me for my own safety, too. In the corporeal world, demons enter people. They dwell inside them and control them. Demons don't have that sort of use for us. Instead of possessing, they envelop and dominate us. They show us how little power and control we really have. I circumvented the group until I was behind Emma. That also put me right next to the demon, but it was occupied with the planchette, or maybe it didn't see me as a threat. Emma was the key. Her empathetic ability was the only tool I had left, but I wasn't sure how to use it. She'd shown that she could hear me, but could she understand? I didn't think so. I wondered if she might sense my touch. Keeping an eye on the demon, I took hold of Emma's free wrist, the one that wasn't on Roland's shoulder. She immediately flinched away. I understood why, but that didn't make it any less frustrating. I tried again, this time only touching the back of her hand, and I projected my desire to save her and her friends. I even whispered to her, "I'm here to protect you." At least one of these tactics worked, and Emma allowed my hand to stay. I slid my thumb behind hers so I could gently guide her hand to the Ouija board. "No, Emma, leave it alone," Gavin said. "God, that idiot. Purporting to be so keen on the spirit world, yet being so dully insensitive to it." I could have punched him. I gave Emma a reassuring squeeze, which she emphatically understood. I guided Emma's hand towards the word goodbye at the bottom of the board and gave her another squeeze, then let her go. I felt confident that she would know what to do. "Guys, I think we need to end this," she said, her hand hovering over goodbye. "No!" Roland shouted, a deep anger boiling beneath his voice. "It's not his mother," I whispered to Emma, and thank the Lord she could understand me. Enough to matter, at least. Emma now pleaded with Gavin and Lily. "We need to end this session right now, guys. Something's really wrong. I can feel it." "I need to talk to her," Roland argued. "Roland, I don't think your mom is talking. I think it's something bad," Emma said, turning to him. "Yeah, she might be right," Lily said. "Before it said it was your mom, it was telling us we weren't safe and all that, remember?" Words can't describe how grateful I was to hear my silly prank may have saved the day. "Oh, yeah, spirits do lie to get what they want sometimes," Gavin said. "I can feel her, though," Roland whispered, "but He sounded unsure. Emma's hand went to the planchette. Again, the demon's shadows clawed. I noticed her hand was outlined by a faint white aura. Whatever energy gave Emma her emphatic ability was something wholesome and beautiful. It forced the demon to retract angrily, almost like it had been burned. Gavin touched the planchette again, then Lily. They all looked at Raelyn, but he didn't move. Emma took his hand in her free one and pulled it towards the planchette. He still clearly did not want to end the session, but he allowed this to happen. They all four of them were touching the planchette. Emma slid it to goodbye, and as if it had never been there, the demon vanished. I whispered thanks to Emma, but closing the session had dulled her connection to me. I'll admit this made me a little sad, despite the victory we had won. The teenagers left shortly after, and I haven't seen them since. That must have been, 10 years ago now. It's hard to keep track. Raelyn didn't seem any lighter when he left that night. Unfortunately, I have to assume that he still had the attachment. But with a friend like Emma by his side, I hope he's been able to rid himself of it. Can't imagine she would have let him go on like that. The white light I saw around her hand made it easy to believe she saved him. And, like I already mentioned, Ouija boards aren't allowed in my house anymore. These days, kids are using all kinds of electronic equipment, though, and the Ouija board seems to be getting less popular. That's good. You just can never know what's really talking to you with one of those things. It could be a swell guy like me, or could be something much, much darker. It's best just to keep those channels closed. Can't ever really know who or what is speaking to you from the other side.
One more story, and then I believe it'll be time for me to go and maybe have a little nap. I won't put you out in the rain just yet, though. Not until our contract has been complete. So let's hear a story about a certain incident. And it seems that once again, we'll be finishing on a story from our old friend, Scare in a Box. So, let's hear about the cardboard box incident.
The snow stopped falling a few hours ago. What was once an overcrowded city is now a frozen wasteland. You can hardly distinguish the houses between them. The roofs are barely visible above the snow accumulating during the last month. The trees have already succumbed to the cold and the weight of the ice, while the animals have taken refuge with the humans inside houses and other buildings. The wild animals? I don't know. I never really thought about them. Some must have died already, I suppose. Others must be having a great time, like the polar bears. Or maybe these temperatures are too low even for them, and the temperature keeps falling. Nobody knows when it'll stop, or if it's even reversible. Nobody knows exactly how the whole world ended up this way. Of course, we all know the why, but not the how, because everything happened in such a strange way that nobody understands. All the physicists in the world tried to explain it, to solve it, but they couldn't. Now the entire population of Earth is in an underground bunker, those that have been built in case of nuclear war. They're the only places with enough insulation to resist low temperatures, at least for a while. Nobody knows exactly how much will survive. Everything will depend on the amount of provisions that each of us saved. I have enough for several years, of course. I wasn't going to build an anti-nuclear bunker and then not fuel it. The food may last me several decades, but I'm sure I can survive at least 5 years. Perhaps in that time the Earth will warm up again, or the cold will kill me. Anyway, I guess the food will do. In addition, I have the perfect entertainment set, which is also not dependent on the internet, because the internet no longer works. It's It's been down for several weeks. Same with telephone communication, TVs, and even the radio, which was the last to fall, just 2 decades ago. Everyone knows that if the radios stop working, it's only a matter of time before the temperature would drop so low that it would cause flash freezing. The last words heard were, "Please, survive." I've no idea who said them. The president, maybe, or some scientist trying to encourage himself or others. Probably hoping that given the time they have, they'll find some resolution. It was as if he was saying, "Please survive," so someone is there to see that we succeeded. Or, "Please survive so that we don't take the blame for humanity's extinction." The reality is, it really was the fault of the scientists. Or at least, that's what we believe. Because once again, nobody knows exactly what happened. Teleportation. That was the great invention that they were testing. The first teleportation machine in history. The theory was perfect. The machine had been built following the instructions to the letter. Everything had been checked at least 10 times. The task was, in theory, simple. Transporting a cardboard box from point A to point B. At both points, one of the machine halves was located, the transmitter and the receiver. The distance wasn't very far, barely 2 meters. It was the first attempt, after all. They couldn't ask much of it. The cardboard box was placed on the transmitter, right in the middle of the small circular platform that made it up. A protective bubble was placed on top of the box and fitted perfectly into the platform. On the other side, the receiver was exactly the same, except that at the moment it was empty, of course. They activated the mechanism, and instantly the machine began to work. It first undid the box, little by little, witnesses saying it looked a bit like a 3D printer in reverse. Every single atom in the cardboard box was disengaged, allowing the box to enter the proper liminal state to be carried through the air. Across the room, and captured by the receptacle, where it would be rebuilt. The problem was that once the box disappeared, it didn't reappear. Scientists, technicians, engineers reviewed their equations and plans, but found no errors. Both machines were perfect, but no matter what they did, the box wouldn't come back. Nobody knows how long it took from that first test until everything went really wrong. None of those involved in the project said anything, no matter how hard they were pressed. The most they could say was that they had no idea what had happened. At this point, everyone believed them. Nobody had a clue, but at the time, no one did. And they were accused of being the horsemen of the apocalypse. The thing is, a month ago, the cardboard box reappeared. The problem was that it didn't appear on the receiver of the teleporter machine. It didn't even show up in the room they were experimenting with. No, the box appeared in outer space, floating, and it didn't end there. The first one was followed by more and more. The boxes continued to appear throughout space, around the planet, around the moons, even around the sun. The satellites were blocked because the cardboard didn't allow the waves to pass. That's when the internet went down, and everyone really started freaking out. When were they going to upload the videos of what was happening? Where did they go to fight with strangers? Who would they tell their conspiracy theories to? Television was the next thing to fall. Everything was desperate. Everyone was desperate, except for the owners of the newspaper, who were able to put the old printing presses back in operation. The world seemed to go back to the beginning of the 20th century, when only paper newspapers and radios existed. Antique dealers made money, selling old radio sets that had been forgotten for decades. The last image NASA received from the space telescope was so strange and terrifying that no one knew what to say. Not even the news headlines were able to come up with a sensational phrase. The reality was worse than anything they could exaggerate. Space was filled with cardboard boxes. Literally. The image from the satellite had shown NASA that the boxes were not only around the Earth, but also around all the objects in the universe. Planets, stars, even galaxies. It was as if all the empty space in the universe had been replaced with cardboard boxes. All because an experiment had went wrong. In the first week, the sky seemed to be on fire. Looking up, large flares could be seen streaking across the sky, caused by the boxes crashing into Earth's atmosphere and burning up in the process. And since the boxes were everywhere, the whole sky was constantly crossed by flames. Eventually, the flames stopped, and darkness engulfed everything. The boxes had blocked out the sunlight. That's when the temperature started to drop. The snow soon appeared, covering everything. It wasn't long until the entire population had to take refuge, and the temperature just kept dropping. No one knew what the limit would be, just as no one knew whether it would be reversible or how long we would survive. For my part, I didn't have much hope. I was never someone who understood much about science, but I'm sure that if the boxes were still up there, it'll all be over soon. I'm not even sure if all the supplies I have will do any good. The bunker, after all, was built to survive a nuclear disaster, not a permanent winter. The walls are thick and well insulated, but I can already feel the cold coming in. I have a stove, but only one, because I never thought it would be so cold. It was never so cold here where I live, and no one ever told me to worry about that. I should have grabbed another one before I went in, but all I got were blankets. All the ones that were in my house, which weren't many either. I already have one around my body, because I started shivering just now. I'm next to the stove. I'm wearing the thickest jacket I have, but the cold seems to be coming in. It's been almost 3 days since I got into the bunker. The radio is static, and I don't even have the heart to watch movies. I'm afraid I'll freeze while doing it without realizing it. I have a cup of hot coffee in my hand. I left the kitchen on to heat the environment a little more, but I know I'm going to have to turn it off soon because the bunker is hermetic, and although it has an air purification system, I can get poisoned by combustion gases. That's something they always told me when I built it, that I had to be careful with the kitchen. I wonder what will be less painful, death by cold or death by gas poisoning. If the internet still existed, I'd look it up, although I really don't know if I want to know the answer. I get up, dragging the blanket behind me, and finish turning off the stove. It's better to be cautious. I go back to my place by the stove and grab my cup of coffee. It helped warm me up a bit, but not too much because it cooled down pretty quickly. The last sip I take seems to be taken from the fridge. This damn bunker has turned into an ice cream parlor. I bet if I turned off the refrigeration that I have, everything would stay the same. And that makes me wonder, how long will it be until the power goes out? Because I'm sure that the cables coming from the power plant must already be having problems. I know some areas that have been under blackout. Here, luckily, nothing's happened yet. I hope it lasts a long time. I don't want to imagine what it'll be like to be cold and in the dark on top of that. Well, it would be almost like being outside, I guess. Outside with the dark sky, no stars, no sun, without even being able to see the light of the moon. Just cardboard boxes, which are not even visible from here. We only know they're there because of the flares and the photos. Damn teleportation. Nobody needed it. Why did they have to invent it? It's useless. It wouldn't solve anything. Why? I guess it's nobody's fault, really. No one could have imagined that the experiment would go so wrong. After all, in whose head could something like this bring about the end of the world? I wrap myself in another blanket. I don't know if it's really colder or I'm just imagining it. I look at the clock and see that it's already night, but I can't sleep. I don't want to risk falling asleep and never waking up. Damn, it's really cold here, I whisper to myself, to no one in particular, to the universe.
Just like that, our stories are at an end. But don't be too sad. I'm sure I'll see you all again very soon for more great stories and more great times spent with great friends around a wonderful fire. Till then, this is Dr. Plague wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.